For more resources, visit rymonline.org.
The Local Youth Worker is a daily podcast that's centered on 5 questions each week. Ranging from the practical to the professional, we're looking for answers to the questions you're asking. Whether you're in full-time, part-time, or even volunteer youth ministry, this podcast is for you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Local Youth Worker, a daily podcast brought to you by Reformed Youth Ministries. I'm your host, John Parrott. Today I have Dr. Dan Dumas joining me on the show. Dr. Dumas, welcome.
Well, glad to be here.
Dr. Dumas served as a college pastor for over 14 years. He serves as special advisor for foster care and adoption to the governor of Kentucky. He is a teaching pastor and elder at Crossing Church in Louisville, Kentucky. He is the author of Live Smart, the co-author of A Guide to Biblical Manhood, and the editor of A Guide to Expository Ministry. He currently serves as a special advisor to Dr. R. Albert Mohler, president of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, where he is also a faculty member. He has served in a variety of ministry capacities in many local churches, including executive pastor at Grace Community Church in Sun Valley, California. Prior to his time in ministry, he served in the U.S. Navy as a search and rescue swimmer. That's quite a bio there. And so thank you again for taking the time to be with us today.
It's my privilege. Looking forward to it.
For those who listen to the show, you know that there are times that we break away from our 5 basic questions we ask youth workers, and that's what we'll be doing today. Some of you are aware of the Student Discipleship Guide that RYM produced with Josh Byers. Dr. Dumas actually authored a book that appeared on that list. It's entitled Live Smart, Preparing for the Future God Wants for You. And so our 5 questions this week will be focused on the material from that book. Now, tomorrow we'll get into the content of the book, but today we really want to look at some of the origins and talk about how that book began. But before we get into that, would you mind just telling us a little bit more about your family as well as some of the youth conferences that you're involved in?
Yes, I'm the proud husband to Jane Sawyer Dumas. We've been married 25 years. We have 2 adoptive sons, Aiden, who is 14 years old and just started high school playing basketball and moving into the high school years, teenage years, crazy years. And I also have an 8-year-old, Elijah Seth Dumas, and he is in the 3rd grade and active and loves just about everything in this life. I really enjoy youth conferences. I don't know if I'm aging out of the space, to be honest with you, John. But when you get to be 52, you're thinking, why do they still have me? So I'm trying to be cool without wearing skinny jeans and a scooter kind of thing. But so I helped start D3, which is a conference on Southern Seminary and Boyce College's campus. And we have been doing that, I think now, 8 years, I think. I think it's our 8th year coming up. And so I'm involved in the planning of that as well as the theming of that. And this would be kind of a bonus camp or a platinum camp. So those upper 20% that are super serious, because it's a lot of teaching. I mean, it's like 14 general sessions and breakout sessions. So it's content rich. You know, we still have a blast, doing all the normal camp stuff. But it really is a kind of a dense, heavy, weighty kind of camp. So not every teenager or youth could endure it. So we kind of say, hey, send the top 20% to D3 as a bonus camp that particular summer. We kind of inoculate them with the truth and with worldview, with leadership principles, and it's just a fantastic. Some of my favorite weeks of the year. We do it for 2 weeks at the end of June each year. So you can check that out at www.sbts.edu/events.
Excellent. Well, yeah, that's definitely, as you were talking about the content-driven conferences. I mean, that's so much of what RYM is passionate about as well, is, giving students a place to have fun and to enjoy a conference, but also giving them, the content specifically, of God's Word in their lives, because we know, obviously, they need that. So, we're definitely on the same page there. So thank you for your...
Our mantra is play hard, preach hard. That's kind of the mantra over our D3 conference.
Excellent. Well, that's good. Let's go ahead and get into the first question for today. As I said, we'll get into some of the content more tomorrow of your book, but really asking a question today dealing with the origins of your book. So the first question is, how long had the idea of Live Smart been in your heart and mind before you wrote it? And that's just, talking about some of the driving passions that moved you to write it.
Well, I think I could go back to my college pastor years where kind of the seeds were there, because I love working with the younger generation in particular. But as I, probably about 2 years before writing it, as I began to think about my own boys and their progress or lack thereof, I thought if I could write them a book, if I could write to their generation. And so I began to kind of craft. I began to think about it. It began to surface in some of my classes that I taught on leadership and pastoral ministry. And so it started perking up probably 2 years prior to actually writing the book. And it had its view, my own boys, and the kind of target age, John, was 15 years old. That's what the publisher wanted. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the target demography that I had to hit. And at the time, I think my son was 12, and so I was really thinking about, what do I need to share with him? What are the kind of, 14 areas that he needs to grow in and develop in the next, 4, 5, 6 years?
Great. Yeah. And I know, and I said we'll get into some of this tomorrow. I know there are 14 principles that you just talked about. What was it about those 14 principles that why not 12? Why not 20? What was it about kind of narrowing it down to those 14 principles?
Yeah, it was really a narrowing down. I mean, I probably had 28, but they were overlapping and kind of similar. So the publisher, and my team started saying, "Hey, you can't have 28 things. That's just berserk. You've got to get control." And so I kind of, collapsed concepts, put them up under, some weren't, like anything, some weren't really big principles. They were subtext and sub principles to a greater one. So I just collapsed that down. So I didn't really start out with, okay, I got to have 14. Like the publisher said, we need 14 things for, principles for young people. I just said, these are the areas that I feel like I could speak to and provide weight and heft. And it just happened to end at 14.
Oh, yeah. And I know, too, and I guess we are getting into a little bit of the content, but you break the book up into 4 different sections. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about those sections and, why you broke it up in that way, and just explain some of that to us if you would.
Well, like anything, sections are ways to hang your thoughts, right, and to kind of coalesce what you're thinking about and writing about. So part 1 was you and God. Part 2 was you and others. Part 3, you and yourself. And part 4 was you and the gospel. So, I mean, obviously, I wanted it to have a vertical dimension, so it's you and God. A horizontal dimension, you and others. To pay close attention on yourself. So you and yourself, just kind of thinking through your own leadership and your own life. In the spirit of 1 Timothy 4, 16, where it says, pay close attention to yourself and to your doctrine. Mm-hmm. That's about the only place where you get biblical narcissism coming into play, right? Where you can kind of look within and say, hey, am I doing okay? Kind of the examine yourself of 2 Corinthians 11:3. And of course, the gospel. I mean, you can't leave out the gospel, and it shapes your worldview. It shapes everything, and to know the gospel and to, speak, defend, and spread the gospel. I mean, these are just, you got to have these, especially when you're in your teenage years. I mean, being kind of rooted and grounded in the gospel. So that's the four big kind of overarching categories, and like you stated, there are 14 up under those four categories.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. I mean, just speaking personally, it's an excellent book that we hope to get into the hands of teenagers more and more as we produce that, student discipleship guide. We want to put good, solid biblical content into the hands of teenagers. And it seems like there has been, somewhat of a void of good, solid content that's aimed at teens for a while, but it seems like we're kind of coming out of that a little bit, and we're seeing a little more resources that are aimed at, like you said, teenagers, even though many of them, don't necessarily pick up a theological book and are more, apt to pick up, a smartphone and look at, Netflix or whatever. We're hoping that students can, start picking up and utilizing some of these resources. So just out of curiosity, have you heard from any teenagers what the feedback has been from them, picking up this book, some of that fruit?
Yeah, it's, the phrases that I hear from the students are, it's readability,
Mm-hmm.
it's digestible, it's not 380 pages, most 13 to 18-year-olds aren't going to read that, and it's doable.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to be immensely practical, so I didn't want it to be happy clappy and just surface and shallow.
Sure.
But I also wanted to be digestible in the sense that you could wrap your mind around these themes and these principles and these concepts. And on a regular basis, someone will, through social media, send me a picture of their daughter, at a baseball game, and they're in the stands and they're reading it, or late at night in their room. And so I'm grateful that teens are and 20-somethings are reading it. I didn't anticipate, honestly, I really wrote to, your target audience, your middle school audience, kind of middle school to millennial was the framework of it.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of surprised me, though, is I guess it was an unintended audience, was the youth pastors enjoying it, mm-hmm. and then deploying it with their ministries, and then even parents. I didn't mm-hmm. even, I guess towards the end I was thinking, okay, I guess they could use this. This could be a great tool. But dads sitting down with their sons and daughters, moms with daughters, kind of sitting down, walking them through Live Smart, has just proven to be even a larger audience than the actual teenagers. Because I guess by and large, teenagers don't kind of rummage through bookstores, grab a book and say, I want to read that. Someone recommends mm-hmm. it to them, or a parent says, let's read that together. I know that I do that with my boys. I pick up books because I'm a book hog. So I pick up books all the time, and just so it gives a context to talk through these things. And that's what I wanted it to be and feel like. I wanted them to be able to kind of read it and discuss it chapter by chapter, manageable. And then on top of that craziness, a lot of adults read it. And I get these comments on social media like, I loved your book. And I'm like, I really didn't write it for you, but I'm glad you do. So maybe the simplicity of it and the succinctness of it, I mean, it's proven to find a broader audience than I even imagined. And when I worked with the publisher originally, they loved it because it was pithy, it was Proverbs-esque, mm-hmm. in its nature, and it has a little bit of black and white. I didn't provide a lot of margin there, kind of puts you in the corner, makes you think about it, makes you loiter there, and that's kind of the nature of Proverbs. They don't mm-hmm. give you a lot of wiggle room, and what I was seeing out there, and I literally sat in like a Barnes and Noble and just combed through all the stuff for kids, and I just didn't see a lot of good content. I mean, mm-hmm. It was a lot of fiction, or 7 Habits of Teenagers kind of stuff, but it wasn't rooted in the gospel. It wasn't like tell a teenager what they ought to do. And so what I did, John, is I thought, okay, I'm at the time, 48 years old or whatever it was. And I thought, okay, if I had a do-over, it's called a mulligan in golf. If I could get a do-over, what would I want to know when I was 15? And was the driving, question that I wanted to answer in that book. If I could do life over again, what would I do different? Or what would I make sure that I had shored up and dialed in my life? And so that produce the 14 chapters.
Well, again, it is a helpful tool, and we hope many more will pick it up and will benefit from the wisdom you put in there. So thanks again for putting that out there, and thanks for your time today.
Glad to help, glad to serve.